Your screen will go dark in 20 seconds. Put on your headphones, close your eyes, and immerse yourself in the story. No one would ever imagine that two people so different would end up trapped in the same tragedy. No one would imagine that among shadowy trees and the smell of smoke, a single touch could change everything. But that night, when the cold made their bodies tremble, when the darkness seemed to swallow the world, their hands found each other. First by accident, then because neither of them wanted to let go. They barely knew anything about each other, barely trusted, barely even liked one another's company, but the forest didn't ask. Survival didn't give them a choice. And fate, well, fate simply drew two strangers close enough for their hearts to start beating in the same rhythm. The smell of smoke was still hanging in the air when Elias opened his eyes. The world no longer had tracks, seats, or windows. It had wet earth, broken branches, twisted pieces of metal, and a dense forest swallowing everything. The distant sound of crackling and small patches of fire replaced the deep noise of the train that just a few minutes earlier had cut through the silence of that isolated region. He tried to sit up, feeling his shoulder protest with a spreading pain. His fingers touched his own face, feeling a cut on his forehead already hardening with dried blood. That was when he heard a voice. "Is anyone there?" A woman called, her voice trembling but firm enough to cut through the chaos. Elias turned his head toward the voice. Between leaves, smoke, and a toppled train car, he saw her. She was standing, though unsteady. Her reddish-brown hair was tied in a braid that was now half undone, dirty with soot. Her dark green jacket was torn at the hem, her jeans ripped open at the right knee. Her light eyes were wide, not just with fear, but with urgency. "I'm here," he said, his voice hoarse. She came closer, stepping around the wreckage. She stopped a few steps away from him, assessing him from head to toe. "Can you stand?" she asked. "I think so," he replied, forcing his body to obey. When he got up, the world spun for a second, but he stayed on his feet. He was taller than her, his body shaped by years at the gym and a disciplined life. His blue dress shirt was torn at the shoulder, his dark pants covered in dust and mud. "How many people did you see alive?" she wanted to know. "3, back there, but they were badly hurt," he answered, running a hand through his hair. "And you?" "I found 2. One of them didn't make it," she said, swallowing hard. For a moment, the two of them were silent, listening only to the distant crackling of heated metal. "I don't think it's safe to stay here," she said. "There could be fire, an explosion, anything." "And go where?" he asked, looking at the dense forest. "We're in the middle of nowhere." She pointed in the opposite direction of the crash. "The forest is the only place we can go to get away from this," she said. "Here we're easy targets for anything." He frowned. He didn't like the idea, but he liked even less the alternative of staying surrounded by wreckage. "What's your name?" he asked. "Lia," she answered. "And yours?" "Elias." "All right, Elias," she said with an impatient sigh. "Standing here arguing won't help anyone. If we want to survive, we'll have to start walking." But he stared at her for a moment. There was too much determination in those clear eyes for his taste. "Walking with you is a terrible idea," he remarked dryly. She arched an eyebrow, crossing her arms. "Believe me, the last thing I wanted today was to walk through a forest with a bad-tempered stranger," she shot back. "But it's that, or stay here waiting for the train to explode." He took a deep breath. "Fine," he said, "but we need a plan." "My plan is not to die here," she replied, turning her back and starting to walk between the trees. "If you've got a better one, say it." He clenched his jaw, irritated, but he followed her steps. The next few hours were an uneven mix of silence and short arguments. Lia walked ahead, pushing branches aside, avoiding roots, sometimes stopping to listen for some distant sound. Elias walked right behind, carrying a backpack he had found among the wreckage with a few crushed water bottles and an extra jacket. "Do you know where you're going?" he asked at one point. "I know the railway line usually runs near roads or small towns," she said. "The forest isn't infinite. In some direction we'll find a way out." "Some direction is not a very good parameter," he retorted. "Got a better statistical plan?" she asked, without looking back. "Then say it." He didn't answer. The sun began to disappear behind the heavy treetops. The orange light turned bluish, then grey. The cold crept in first through their fingers, then their ears, then their bones. When Lia tried to take a bigger step to cross a fallen log, her foot slipped. She slid and fell to her knees, letting out a cry of pain. Her torn knee throbbed sharply. Elias stopped beside her, looking down at her. "You're going to slow us down," he commented, his impatience betraying a deeper exhaustion than he admitted. She lifted her face, her eyes shining as much with pain as with anger. "Sorry, I'm not a machine," she replied, taking a deep breath. "If you want to leave me here, be my guest." He stayed silent for a few seconds. The wind blew between them, cold and cutting. Elias grabbed the crumpled map he had taken from the train and put it back in the backpack. Then he held out his hand to Lia. "Come," he said simply. She looked at his hand for a moment as if weighing a bigger decision than it seemed. Then she placed her fingers in his and let him pull her up. She didn't thank him. He didn't ask for it. But neither of them let go of the other's hand as quickly as they could have. When night finally fell completely, the forest turned into a maze of shadows. The cold tightened as if it had teeth. The wind cut through their torn clothes, and the darkness made every sound more threatening. A branch breaking in the distance sounded like a step. A rustle could be anything. "We need to stop," Elias said, looking around. "Walking in the dark like this is asking to get lost or get hurt worse." Lia took a deep breath, reluctantly agreeing. "We can look for somewhere between rocks or trees that are closer together," she suggested. "Something that blocks the wind." They walked a few more minutes until they found a formation of large rocks, as if the ground had raised stone shoulders in the middle of the forest. Between two of those rocks, there was a narrow, sheltered space. "Here," Elias said, "we can improvise a shelter." He started gathering dry branches, stacking them to partially cover the entrance of the small hollow. Lia tried to help, but her hands were shaking too much. He looked at her when one of the small logs slipped from her fingers. "You're cold," he commented. "Brilliant," she replied, trying to blow warm air into her hands. "I thought these were just happiness chills." Despite the answer, her voice came out weak. Elias pulled the thickest jacket from the backpack, the only one he had taken from the train besides the clothes he was wearing. He tossed the jacket toward her. "Before you die of stubbornness," he said. Lia caught it, surprised. The fabric was cold to the touch, but it was still one more layer between her and the wind. "And you?" she asked. "I'll survive," he replied, keeping it simple. They finished adjusting the wall of branches. The space was narrow, but that was exactly what blocked the wind better. They both went inside. In there, the darkness was almost total. A few cracks let in a thread of starlight, but barely. Silence took over, broken only by their breathing. After a few minutes, Lia began to shiver again, even with the jacket. Elias felt his whole body resist what his mind didn't want to admit. "Lia," he began, his voice low. "We're losing heat too fast." "I know," she murmured. He fell silent for a second, choosing his words. "The human body loses less heat when there's contact," he said. "If we don't stay closer, it could be dangerous." She didn't answer right away. She could have laughed at the scientific explanation, or refused. But she did neither. She simply leaned her body a few centimeters toward him. That simple movement said more than any word. Elias moved closer slowly, respecting a space only she could shrink. When their shoulders touched, her body reacted with a shiver. He wrapped an arm around her torso, pulling her gently closer. Lia let him. She rested her face on his chest, searching for whatever warmth remained there, mixed with the smell of smoke, sweat, and something strangely calming. Their hands were trapped between their bodies, squeezed in that tight space. In the dark, when one of them moved, their fingers ended up touching. The first contact was accidental. Lia could have pulled her hand away. Elias could have withdrawn his. Neither of them did. Their fingers brushed again, more clearly this time, and then stayed that way, in a kind of silence that said far too much. "I never imagined surviving would be like this," Lia whispered, her voice muffled against his chest. "Me neither," Elias replied honestly. His heart was beating faster than he wanted to admit. So was hers. And yet there, in the middle of nowhere, in that improvised shelter, the cold began to give in a little, squeezed between their two bodies. For a moment, there was no train, no crash, no forest. There were only two people far too strange to each other and far too close to ignore. Dawn came pale, filtered through the treetops. When they stepped out of the shelter, they both seemed different, not because they had slept well, they hadn't, but because the invisible line between them was less defined. "We need water," Elias said, slipping back into practical mode. "And food. We can't walk all day with nothing." Lia looked at the ground around them, listening carefully. "If we find the sound of running water, we can follow it," she commented. "Rivers usually lead to civilization." "And if we don't?" he asked. "Then we come up with another plan," she replied. "It's already more than we had yesterday." They started walking again. As the hours passed, the heat from the effort hid the cold a bit, but brought another problem: fatigue. Lia's knee bothered her with every step. Elias noticed, even though she tried to hide it. "Let me see that knee," he said when they finally stopped to rest near a large tree. "No need," Lia answered automatically. "Yes, there is," he insisted. "You limped the whole way." She rolled her eyes, but sat on an exposed root. He knelt in front of her, carefully lifting the torn fabric of her jeans. The wound wasn't deep, but it was full of dried dirt. "It'll get infected if we don't clean it," he said. "Oh, you're a doctor now?" she teased. "No," he replied, "but I'm someone who doesn't want to have to carry you unconscious through here." She let out a quick, surprised little laugh. He used some of the water from one of the bottles to clean the area with careful movements. His touch was firm, but gentle. Lia watched his face while he focused on the task, noticing the line of worry between his brows. "Thank you," she murmured at last. He lifted his gaze to meet hers. "You're welcome," he said. To protect the wound, he tore a piece from his own shirt and made a simple bandage around her knee. When he finished, he commented, "You could try not to fall into any more holes today. I'll have a talk with the forest roots about that," she replied with a half smile. The day went on with small exchanges like that, barbs that, strangely, began to sound more like a shared language than attacks. At a certain moment, a different sound cut through the monotony. Running water. "Did you hear that?" Lia asked, lifting her head. "I did," Elias replied. "Sounds like a stream." The sound was faint but steady. They followed it until they found, between rocks and roots, a crystal-clear stream running through the green. Lia dropped to her knees by the water, washing her hands, her face, drinking eagerly. Elias did the same, but with slightly more controlled movements. "This is almost a miracle," Lia said, feeling the cold water run down her chin. "It's survival," Elias commented. She looked at him, tilting her head. You always talk as if you have an instruction manual for everything, she observed. Work, forest, people. I like to be in control, he replied sincerely. She gave a small, crooked smile. And how's that working out here? She asked, gesturing around them. He took a moment to answer. Badly, he admitted. She laughed, and for the first time, her laugh was free, even if brief. They filled the bottles, wet their necks, took deep breaths. Lia sat on a rock, watching the shaky reflection of her own image. I was going to visit my sister, she said suddenly. We hadn't seen each other in months. I spent the night before packing my bag, thinking about how it would be to see her at the station. And now... She sighed, letting the sentence fade. And you? She asked. Where were you going? Elias stared at the water for a moment. Business, he answered. Automatic. Lia narrowed her eyes. Business has a name, she said. When someone hides behind that word, it's usually because there's something else there. He hesitated. I was going to present a big project, he finally admitted. One of those things that can change your career, or destroy it. I get it, she murmured. And now the project doesn't matter that much, right? He gave a small, humorless smile. Now I just want to get out of this forest alive, he replied. Not just you, she corrected. Us. He looked at her with a different expression, one that mixed surprise, gratitude, and something harder to name. Us, he repeated. Afternoon came, and with it the cold wind again. This time they prepared the shelter more calmly, using rocks, branches, and some large leaves. They found a slightly drier spot, protected by a slope. When they curled up inside, the experience of the previous night made everything less strange, and at the same time, more intense. Lia moved closer to him without needing any explanation. Elias received her as if it were already a silent agreement. Their bodies fit together naturally, but there was something different in how their hands met that night. It wasn't accidental anymore. Their fingers sought each other. She intertwined hers with his, this time clearly. He squeezed back just enough to make it clear he was fully there. The silence between them was no longer empty. It was full of thoughts, questions, confused feelings. Their hearts were beating fast, but somehow in sync. I was sure you were going to be unbearable from start to finish, Lia murmured, her sleepy voice far too close to his neck. Thanks for the confidence, he replied with rare humor. She smiled against his chest. You're still bossy and excessively logical, she added. But you also gave me the jacket, pulled me up when I slipped, cleaned my knee. He stayed quiet for a few seconds. And you think that makes me tolerable? He asked. It makes you important, she answered softly, almost as if she didn't want him to hear. But he did. All of Elias's body reacted to that word. Important, not useful, not intelligent, not efficient. Important. He tilted his head slightly, resting his chin on the top of her head. You're important too, he said. Lia felt a strange warmth rise in her chest, one that had nothing to do with the night's temperature. If I say I'm scared, are you going to give me a rational explanation? She asked with a faint trace of a laugh. Maybe, he said, but first I'll say I'm scared too. She tightened her fingers around his. So we have that in common, she murmured. There, between rocks and shadows, the cold wasn't their only enemy. There was also a feeling growing, insistent, that the forest seemed to water with each second of forced closeness. The next day, the forest decided to remind them it was still in control. They were following a sort of improvised trail, going around rocks and fallen trees, when the terrain began to get steeper. The earth was damp, slippery. Go slow, Elias said. This is unstable. I am going slow, Lia replied. She took one more step forward, and the ground gave way. In a second, Lia lost solid ground beneath her feet and started sliding down the slope in a mix of mud, leaves, and stones. Her scream cut through the forest. "Elias!" He reacted without thinking. He threw himself to the ground and lunged forward, managing to grab her arm before she fell completely. The pull dragged his body dangerously close to the edge. His shoulder protested with a sharp pain, as if it were being torn apart. "I'm going to fall!" Lia screamed, feeling her feet kicking at empty air. "I'm not letting you go," Elias said, firm, his voice carrying a conviction that left no room for doubt. Her weight pulled his body forward. The mud gave way further under his knees. For a moment it seemed like both of them would fall. Elias felt his shoulder dislocate. A dull crack shot through the bone, and pain exploded. He screamed but kept his grip on her arm. "Elias, let go," Lia begged, her face wet with tears and mud. "You'll fall with me." "I'm not losing you here," he replied through clenched teeth. "Not after everything." With his other hand, he grabbed a thick root. He gathered what little strength he had left and pulled Lia up with all he had. The effort was brutal. His body felt like it was tearing inside, but little by little her fingers managed to grip the edge. She helped push herself up until she finally rolled to the safe side, collapsing on top of him. For a few seconds they just lay there, breathless, one on top of the other, unable to speak. Lia braced her hands on his chest, feeling his heart hammering far too fast. "Why did you do that?" she asked, her voice shaking from the fright and the emotion. He looked at her. His face was dirty, his forehead sweaty, his eyes darker than ever. "Because I can't accept the idea of you disappearing in this forest," he answered. Because I don't want to lose you." The sentence hung between them, heavy and light at the same time. Lia felt something rearrange inside her. Her own fear seemed to take on a different shape now. She leaned closer to him, not realizing she was still partly lying on his body, and hugged him tightly. He felt her arms wrap around him, as if she needed to make sure he was real, that he was still there. He hugged her back, even with his shoulder burning in pain. There, on the side of the slope, dirty, exhausted, shaking, the two of them understood. They were no longer just two survivors sharing the same patch of ground. There was an us now. When they finally found flatter terrain again, Elias could barely move his right arm without grinding his teeth. "Your shoulder is not okay," Lia said, worried. "I'll manage," he replied. "It's not about managing," she countered. "It's about not making it worse." She found a straighter stick and used a piece of fabric to improvise a sling, holding his arm against his chest. Her fingers touched his skin carefully, but there was a different intimacy in each gesture, a tenderness that didn't need many words. "You take care of me, I take care of you," she said, tying the last knot. "Fair deal." He looked at her, an expression of pain and affection crossing his face. "Seems fair," he said. Time passed in a blur. It could have been 2 more days. It could have been 3. For them, it meant only this. We're still walking. We're still alive. We're still together. They slept very close every night, and with each night, their bodies grew more used to each other. The touches stopped being only about emergency warmth and became unconscious seeking. Lia listened to his heartbeat before falling asleep, as if that sound set a safe rhythm in the middle of the chaos. Elias breathed in the scent of her hair and memorized it, as if afraid of forgetting once they left that place. Their conversations grew less defensive. Lia told stories from her childhood, the drawings she used to make, the dreams she changed every year. She said she was trying to restart a complicated relationship with her sister. Elias spoke of a life that was too organized, too full of goals, of days stretched between deadlines, meetings, and an apartment as tidy as it was lonely. "You know, I always thought people like you lived for this," Lia commented one night, her face just a few centimeters from his. "Numbers, deadlines, results." "I thought so too," he replied. "But now, When I think about what mattered most to me here, it wasn't my goals or my projects. It was hearing you complain, trip, laugh, call me annoying." She smiled, her eyes shining. "And holding my hand in the dark," she completed. He squeezed her hand, confirming it. "And holding your hand in the dark," he agreed. When they finally left the densest part of the forest, the sky seemed bigger. The tall green gave way to more spaced-out trees. The ground grew less uneven, less damp. In the distance, a brown line cut across the horizon. "That's," Lia said, squinting to see better. "A dirt road," Elias finished. They looked at each other, as if they needed the other's confirmation that it was real. "We did it," Lia murmured. "We're almost there," Elias corrected. "We still need someone to pass by." As if the universe had heard them, a few minutes later, the sound of an engine filled the air. A pickup truck appeared, raising dust, slowing down, when it saw two human figures, dirty, torn, and staggering at the side of the road. Men jumped out quickly, asking if they were hurt, offering blankets, water, help. Someone made a call to report survivors of the accident. Another brought a bottle. As the outside world drew near, Lia and Elias felt something strange. A part of them didn't want to move away from each other, not even a few centimeters. One of the rescuers spoke to Elias, asking him to sit in the back of the truck. Another called Lia over to check her knee and vital signs. They looked at each other. Between ambulances, sirens about to blare, questions and notes, there was a small window of just a few seconds that belonged only to them. Lia walked up to Elias, who was about to climb into the truck. He looked at her, as if he no longer knew exactly what to do with his hands in this new world. She decided for him. Lia raised her hand and touched his face gently, tracing an imaginary line near the cut on his forehead with her thumb. "When we're completely out of this," she said, her voice soft but firm, "nothing will be the same." He held her hand against his face, keeping it there for a moment. "I don't want it to be the same," he replied, "not after everything that happened here." Her eyes filled with tears, this time not from fear, but from something that looked a lot like hope. "Then," she began, taking a deep breath, "when the reports, the hospitals, the interviews are over, we see each other again, somewhere with no smoke and no broken tracks, just us. Deal?" He smiled, a tired, genuine smile. "Deal," he said. She stepped a little closer. Their faces were close enough for him to feel the warm air of her breath. For a second, the world seemed to hold its own. Lia didn't kiss him. Not there, not in front of everyone. But she rested her forehead against his, closing her eyes. He closed his eyes too, holding that contact as if it were a continuation of all the nights they had spent keeping each other warm. Their hands met one last time before they were separated by the rescuers' procedures. Their fingers tightened, then slowly let go, almost reluctantly. They climbed into different vehicles, were taken to different hospitals, spoke to different people. The world went back to having rules, schedules, questions, cold hospital lights, clean clothes, hot showers. But for them, something had changed irreversibly. One night, one touch in the dark, and everything they knew, about fear, about loneliness, about what really matters, had been turned upside down. Lia, lying in a hospital bed, stared at the ceiling and smiled to herself, remembering the way he had said, "I'm not going to lose you." Elias, somewhere else, with his shoulder immobilized, closed his eyes and almost physically felt the weight of her head resting on his chest. They knew the forest would be left behind, but they also knew that what was born there wouldn't fade so easily. One night, one touch, and everything changed.